Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first IRMS Public Sector event of 2023. I am just going to do a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to our speaker, Jaana Pinnick, who's going to take us through digital preservation in the next hour. So just a little bit of housekeeping. The slides and the recording will be made available after the event. The recording can take up to 2 weeks to appear because there's quite a lot of work needs to be done to get them ready for upload. So please bear with us while we get that done. If you have any questions, ideally, if you could put them in the questions tab, but I do know that if you've dialed in on a mobile device, you won't be able to see the questions tab. So we're happy to take questions in the chat, and we will take questions for Jaana at the end of the session, just in case she covers something that somebody has in a question later on in the presentation. So that's all from me. I hope that you enjoy the session, and I'm now going to hand over to Jaana to take us through the next hour. So over to you, Jaana.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and welcome to all of you who have joined us this afternoon. We are in the 70s now, which is a fantastic number, and we are still growing. So my name is Jaana Pinnick. I'm the current Vice Chair of the Society, and today I'm really more talking about the digital preservation, which is my day job. So you will hear about where I work as well, and some of you already know. So I'm starting to share the slides now, and hopefully this will work. We have practiced. Okay, and I trust that's showing now. Yeah, excellent, because I can't see the questions or comments now. So like Elizabeth said, we'll take those at the end. So what I will talk about today is how to get started with a digital preservation program if you are not a digital archivist. So if you have other type of information records management background. So we are going to start about what does digital preservation actually mean? And the National Archives have two different concepts. They have digital preservation and digital continuity. And the first is a long-term archival management of digital information assets, which are selected for their historical value after they have passed out of business ownership. Digital continuity then is a slightly different way of looking at it. It's the ability to use your information in the way that you need for as long as you need. And if you do not actively work to ensure the digital continuity, your information may become unusable fairly quickly. We can also look at preservation from the perspective of your role and your experience, but there are two things that and you will hear me talk about Digital Preservation Coalition a lot today, because I'm a member and I'm in one of their subcommittees. So they raise two aspects that are essential. One, it is developing and promoting a shared understanding of digital preservation in your organization, especially if you need to change your organizational culture, if you want to change the way people work, people think about their digital content. And second, it's integrating staff information management activities and corporate records management procedures to support your digital continuity capability development. So it's those things, change culture, change management, and also looking at what you are already doing. Digital preservation is not just one thing. It's a complex topic, and I've only listed a few things here. So if I've missed something that you already know about, you can just forgive me for having a short list here, but some of these words are familiar to you from records management. You're doing appraisal, deciding what must be preserved, unique identifiers, describing what it is you have, so metadata, making sure your records, your content is complete and unaltered. Then we are getting to a bit more digital preservation terminology, checksums and fixity checks. So those are long strings that show your files are unchanged. You also need to think about maintenance. If you start doing preservation activities, are you able to maintain those in the long term? Because otherwise there's little point in starting if you can't keep doing it. You're doing all this to provide access to the digital content in the long term, and that also covers renderability. So what software or platform you are using to provide that access. There's all sorts of aspects in obsolescence, whether it's physical media, data, file format obsolescence. So those are part of it. And also all of this will need to provide that the content you are preserving is authentic. And finally, looking at what actions you do take over time, because sometimes you need to think about those, the rights to do those activities as well. But it's not only about technology and software and file formats. It's a lot of it is about people. So that covers, as we will see later in the talk, a lot of activities that you are already involved in before even starting any preservation program. You will have been writing and updating policies, strategies. You will work together with staff and other external stakeholders. You will talk about the need to do your work. You may liaise with third-party services, certification, definitely with legal compliance aspects, looking at risks of not doing things. We already mentioned change management, training your colleagues, training your staff, developing yourself even, and including all the best practice that is relevant to your context and your organization. And we will look in this presentation about doing business cases and having a look at the benefits of doing digital preservation. Some of you may be familiar with the Digital Preservation Coalition World Digital Preservation Day, which they started running in 2017-18, I think. And there's a link there, so when you get the slides, you can at least then have a look at what has been done in previous years. But the activities include blogs, events, and this may be just local to your organization, or you can join in the global events on social media. You can access the resources and logos and use them in your local events. You will even find songs and people dancing. So it's quite a fun day, and it's every year the first Thursday of November. Examples from the British Geological Survey, which is where I work most of the time. We have a lot of scientists and we have a data center, so we have tried to pull all this together by listing the benefits of for the scientists to give their data to the data center rather than storing it in their local machines or hard drives. So why is that a good idea to provide long-term access to their research data? We've done for Halloween digital data horror stories, and these are real stories of things that have happened with our staff and our data. And also I mentioned unique digital identifiers. So we can mint digital object identifiers for data sets. So we got one of the scientists to promote what he has got out of doing that. So your organization will have different content, different stakeholders, but you will be able to find some of your local benefits and horror stories, and also people to promote what you want to be doing. So there's no point in doing preservation just for the sake of it, but you are doing it because there are some risks that you want to mitigate against and some challenges that you want to overcome. So let's have a look at what the problems are. First of all, these are, again, from BGS. We have all this type of content in the cupboards, lots of cartridges, tapes, discs, and we've had to, over time, make sure we capture content from these media into the current systems. So you can think about your context and what you got. So problem, I've listed a few aspects here, and let's have a look at those. So you're doing this to maintain access to the content. We've already looked at the obsolescence. You've come across possibly bit rot, link rot, those things where you have, for example, on the website, error 404, where the web link doesn't work anymore. So that's one issue within digital preservation. So over time, more and more links will disappear. User licenses. So if you have a proprietary software or a program, and you need to keep paying to use it, that is not always possible to for other users to pay. Volumes of digital content, we all know how digital data is increasing very rapidly. There are bigger and bigger files. There's large data sets, loads of thousands and thousands of files in some contexts. And then if people start creating multiple copies, migrating files to another format, or using different names for identical files if you're sharing content. So it soon increases out of all eventuality. Understandability, I mentioned the contextual metadata. Practical example is if you get Excel sheets and the column headings are not there. So if you think about reusing that Excel sheet, how does anybody know what the content is about? You will know your abbreviations, but does somebody who accesses your content, do they understand those? Do they understand the acronyms? So my favorite is always creating README notes where you list all these and preserve that together with your content. I mentioned earlier about having the right to do certain preservation activities. So have you got permission to share the content and use it with other people? So you need to sometimes check whether you've got access, you've got permission to preserve and change that content for future. Is it password protected? You should have only preserve things that are open, because within 10 years nobody will remember that password, especially if the files have changed as well. And also if there's anything private that is protected by legislation, you need to think about whether that can be preserved. Information security, has that content been tampered with? Is it unique? If it has changed, have those changes been documented so you can still prove that it is a genuine article? In my organization, we talk a lot about the value of data. So we have hundreds of terabytes of scientific data, which would cost a fortune to recreate, and some of it we can't even recreate. You may be lucky in that your problem is a bit smaller, but even so, you may not be able to recreate the data if you lose it. So you need to think about what content is worth preserving and what is not so important. So the long-term reuse value and the stakeholder requirements, what is it needed for, and do you still need it in 10 years, 20 years time? Then archivability goes with the appraisal. So selecting the materials, what should be preserved and how long for. So if you're preserving very robust file formats, say TIFF or PDF, that's not a big problem. But if you have some a bit rarer formats, you may need to monitor them a bit more closely and more often. Are you just having to preserve the content, which makes things as PDFs okay, or do you need to be able to operate an Excel sheet with the formula, and that means you need to actually keep that function working as well? And also human inconsistency, human error. People may do things that you don't expect them to do, and if you have very clever preservation workflows, they may do something that you didn't expect. So where to start? Where do you work? Know your context. wherever you work, it's a unique place. Your organizational framework, your structure, your people, they are different. The reasons why you want to preserve content, they are all different. So that means your aims and purposes to start developing a program, they vary. And the designated community, which refers to all the content generators and the reusers, they vary as well. So you need to look at all of these, and this is where you start thinking, oh, I know pretty much about that already, which is always a good start. And I've got some examples, and I spent a lot of time in these. So in our place, we have the British Geological Survey and the data centre, and we are a place of deposit. So that's something that makes us have to preserve things in the long term. We have legal obligations to manage some content. We need to make most content openly available. So not a lot of restricted content. And we have data that needs to be, by data policy, made accessible for at least 10 years, some over 20 years, and some geoscience data, if you think about fossils and rocks, permanent retention is often required. So it's quite an extreme example. So we drafted an aim and agreed to maintain the long-term reusability and accessibility of authentic, born digital and digitized geoscience data objects as long as required, as evidence of the current UK PLC scientific research record. So just a few words, but to us that captures what we are trying to do. So you step back in your organization and look at your context and your stakeholders. What is it that you are trying to do and why? Just a bit short list of the people that we work with. I shan't spend a lot of time there. You need to do your own list of people. What you probably already have as well in your cases is an information asset register or a catalog, and different types of these as well for different types of content. You can use that register to see what you already manage and how you manage it. So what digital assets do exist at the moment? Where are they kept? How are they being managed? And which of these assets need to be maintained in the long term? Because you may not have the resources to do the same effort of digital preservation on all of those assets. So you need to prioritize those. And also, are there any practices that cause bigger risks to these assets as things are, where you can start improving your workflows and processes? So again, going back to what information and records managers already do, you are already advising your users and your colleagues on collections policies, what you are collecting now. What does a good deposit, a good record look like? Good metadata, how do you describe the content you are collecting? How should your colleagues and the users name their files and folders and versioning? Do you have any preferred file formats that you would prefer them to give you? And of course, retention schedules, which show you where the most long-term records sit. And there's loads more. And all of these things that you already do make your digital content more resilient than it would be otherwise. And at our National Geoscience Data Centre, we provide a lot of best practice guidance on the website. So we publish our policies, good deposit guidelines. We have preferred file formats list, which is a bit more complicated than just an administrative organizations, because we have scientific formats. We advise people on file naming strategies and good quality metadata. So these are some guidance notes that you may already have that you can recycle when you start doing your preservation. So how do we actually get started with the program? First of all, do you have the buy-in from your bosses, your senior executives, your budget holders. Now, the good news is that the Digital Preservation Coalition has thought about this, and they have produced an executive guide on digital preservation, which talks about different organization types. So they have tailored guidance for museums or banks, for example, what motivates different organizations to preserve content, what are their particular risks and opportunities, what does that organization need to do preservation. They also provide some facts and figures which you can use in your communications with the executives. And you can also borrow PowerPoint templates and letters to executives in Word, and you can tweak them to match your circumstances. One particular fact that I like from their website is the vast majority of practitioners, so 98%, report that their organizations have digital records and information they keep or need to keep for more than 10 years. So we most fall into that category. But you do need some money, and not just a couple of shillings either. So you need to justify why this needs to be doing. So identifying preservation risks and what to do about them, identifying benefits and opportunities that are special to your organization, then set and agree objectives. Where is it you are trying to get to? Have a look at the preservation framework, what elements you already have in place. You have records management, you have IT, what else can you already put into this work? Estimating initial costs, whether it's staff time. Many organizations prefer not to start using a lot in the beginning or can't afford to purchase, for example, a full-scale digital preservation program that may come down the line. Then when you start working, how do you measure that you are making progress and you are successful? So you need to think about that instead of just getting on with it. So in a year's time, what have you achieved and how are things better? And that goes together with the future vision. These pages of the DPC resources are currently under revision, so business case toolkit. So it's still useful what they have there, but they are updating this. So if I'm not going to go through it here, but you can revisit using the link. So step-by-step guide to building a business case. What do you need to do? There's also templates, but also helping you answer questions: when, why, what, who, and how. What is going to happen? What is involved in your program development? Tim Collins may be familiar to some of you, and I've linked a couple of papers that he wrote when he worked at the National Archives. And his principles are called parsimonious preservation, which refers to only doing the minimum required to ensure the digital continuity of your content. So not going over the top and spending resources which you can't afford to spend. So looking at the challenges that your digital data and content face, and ensure that that content remains available to future generations. Now, in some contexts, that may mean a year, 5 years, 10 years. So what future generation means, that is for you to decide. And then keeping material available in a limited context should be a priority. So you need to look at how to best use your resources. And that also has the further benefit of, if you only utilize a minimum intervention, that means there's minimal alteration to your files and content, so that from that follows the maximum integrity and authenticity, because you haven't had to change that content and the files. And a further paper around parsimonious preservation talks about the biggest immediate threat to data, digital content, is that we don't capture it at all. It is created, but it's not captured, it is not stored properly, so we can't provide access to it. That, I think, has been discussed in the press in terms of COVID policies, for example, and I shan't go into that deeper, but we need to capture those records around public decision making, for example, so we can preserve them. That's one important aspect of this. And also removable storage media, if your organization gets, and this may be a bit more rare now, but when our data center started working, there were a lot of floppy disks, CDs, even external drives coming in. So you need to move the content from there to your corporate storage, whether it's shared drives or whether it's SharePoint or somewhere where it's more safe, because if your media, your physical media fails, even digital forensics is not guaranteed to get that content of that failed media, or at least it's going to be hugely expensive. And if you are fortunate enough to have a very strong IT department, most of the time their workflows, processes already help you in maintaining that digital continuity in terms of mitigating storage disasters and bit rot, at least. So more information about the parsimonious preservation you can find using the links on these 2 slides. Then actually getting into developing your first preservation policy. So why should you do it? What are the benefits? Well, it first helps you support this business case. So you can detail the solutions and purposes in the policy and document them for the decision makers. Helps also raise staff awareness. When we wrote our first policy, we used that in the World Digital Preservation Day as a quiz, and got people to come and read the policy and ask quiz questions and win a box of chocolates. It also guides staff in their information management activities. So if you have the best practice in your policy, then people know what they are doing is what helps them in the long term. Also securing the commitment of the organization in the long term, rather than thinking about a preservation program as a project that you'll do for a year or 2, and then you have done preservation and you can move on. That's not how it works. So on the left-hand side, I'm talking about the footpath to your policy. We've already covered a lot of this. You knowing your content, your context. What also is helpful is reviewing publicly available policies and strategies of similar organization than yourselves, because there's loads out there, and there's no point in starting things from scratch, because if somebody's already thought about it, you might as well borrow from it. That's what the community is there for. And the DPC handbook has loads of useful content and links as well, so do go and have a look at that. And networking. So this what we are doing here today is part of developing a records management network around digital preservation. So let's make sure that as an organization, the IRMS is also involved from our aspect in doing this. What kind of things you can include in your policy then? There's some headings from the DPC guidance, such as the purpose. Why do you need the policy? Why is the preservation important? The scope, what is in scope, what is not in scope? What does your preservation framework look like? What are staff expected to do? Now, I can't emphasize this enough. If you don't tell the staff what is expected of them, they can't work with you on ensuring the digital continuity. Using all the standards and best practice that is important in your context, and sustainability again. How can you keep going for a long time rather than doing a project. Use any existing policies and best practice guidance, and make sure in terms of glossary that people know what you're talking about, because there may be some terms that people either haven't come across or they understand in a different way than you expect. So our preservation policy is also available online, and we've included in things like integration with data management, technical implementation, legal basis for preservation. I mentioned some of those legislative aspects earlier, and continuous improvement. And that is another thing that is important. So not, we talked about, can't remember, it wasn't quite eating an elephant, but it was sort of introducing something really big. You go a little bit at a time, and that's important in preservation. So how do you then learn about your context and your content and find your facts to use in the development? DPC have developed something called RAM, or Rapid Assessment Model, and the templates are available to anybody on the website. So you can download the assessment worksheet and complete it, and use the graphic on the right to sort of see on what level you currently are, and then decide how do you want to improve and where do you want to head to. And these maturity levels, so there's, for example, policy and strategy, there's IT capability, acquisition, transfer, and ingest, content preservation. They are all based on existing good practice. The only thing that is only available for members is benchmarking your levels to other organizations. So for that, you need to be a member. But you can certainly use this to benchmark your own development within that context. The NDSA levels of digital preservation is another openly available maturity model, and that has 4 levels. So it starts from protecting your data, goes to knowing, monitoring, and repairing your data. And it looks at 5 areas. So it looks at content storage, integrity, control, so mainly access control, metadata, and the content itself. So you can, there's a lot of documentation again on the website to help you determine at what level you currently are, and then to what level it's practical for you to try and get to, and steps that you may need to take to get there. You may also wish to do risk assessment if you need to prioritize what actions you need to take if you can't do all the things. And there's a SPOT model that is also online, a simple property-oriented threat model for risk assessment. And it's intended to be a practical tool, defining 6 properties of successful digital preservation and major risks they face. So they include things like availability, renderability, and authenticity, and there were some others. So let's go and have a look. So it works like this. So the risk types are on the left-hand side. Then you describe what the risk to your content might be. For example, file format changes. So that's a risk type under persistence. And what happens if the file format changes? Well, you may lose access to data. And then manage and mitigate, what may you do to avoid that risk. And you can also link that to traffic light reports. So I think most of you are familiar with this, from very high likelihood to very high impact, and then of course to low, all of those. So you can prioritize and give numbers those, and make a list of what of your content is mostly at risk, so you know to target that first. And this is a way we have applied this to one of our data sets. So for example, looking at bit errors and bit rot for a data set that we've kept over 20 years. So what kind of methods, multiple copies of data using checksums, and we even looked at some tools and technologies. I shan't cover all of these today because this is mostly going to be about starting the program and not going into technical detail. But the tool that I will, and if you've followed any of my previous talks, I've mentioned this already, the National Archives Droid tool, which is a free online resource. And they also provide you a user guide. So even if you have never used Droid before, it's not difficult. It's free of charge. So go and experiment with this. Those of you who have done the DPC training course, Novice to Know-how, I think this was also experimented in that in that course. So you might have already had a go. So it will identify file formats, even if somebody has overwritten that .doc at the end, or if that's missing. It knows the version levels in most cases. Last time I checked, it identified over 1,400 file formats. That may be bigger now because it gets updated quite regularly. And I'll show you a couple of extracts of what you can get out of it. You can get Excel or CSV files out, and then you can manipulate the findings yourself. So when you open Droid, you get this kind of view. So you have options to create a new archive or open the existing one, add and remove content. You can change your preferences. So you can look inside archival files like zip files, 7-zip, etc. And you can also create checksums and do fixity checks using Droid. So you can tell the software what sort of hash you will use, and I've left it at MD5 because that is the least complex, and usually unless you're in banking or somewhere super security, you won't need anything more complex than that. So let's assume I have run Droid over my content, and then you start getting this kind of views, which list the files, and you can start seeing what extensions your files are, what size, when they were last modified, etc. And there's an interesting column there called Pewit, which is a unique identifier, which links to a pronom registry, and I'll show you that in a minute. Which is the identifying registry for all the formats. And lastly, the hash. So that's the security string that will demonstrate that if you run the same, if you run Droid for over the same content next time and the hashtag is unchanged, then the content is unchanged. If you changed even one letter in a Word document, you would get a completely different hashtag. And like I said, you can get the content out as Excel, so you can do whatever you want with it. The pronom registry then is on the National Archives website, and it has it gets a new content and new file formats added to it regularly. The BGS have had one added a geoscience format there a couple of years ago, but it will, if you run Droid over Word documents, it can tell you which particular version of Word it is as well. So that is a very useful thing, and you can go and have a look at the file formats search in the registry. I've already referred to the DPC, the National Archives training, which you can register on using that link on the slide. They first started with the Novice to Know-how digital preservation skills for beginners, which took 2-3 days to complete, and they added providing access to preserve digital content, which is a part of that first, but you can also do it as a standalone, and that's just a 1-day course. They are now developing another module on email preservation. So if that is something you're interested in, keep your eyes open. and go and have a look at the online training booking system. I've also listed a few sources here for you to read. So a small number of books which start from really practical digital preservation, the theory of craft. If you want something a bit more substantial, then the Preserving Digital Materials is a very good, it's now in its 3rd edition, and more to do with record keeping and curation. There's also a couple of books for that. And the DPC handbook and technology watch if you have something specific you want to look at. And more recently, they have produced a guide for small businesses, which I think has a lot of very pragmatic solutions for if you haven't got loads of resources behind you. If you want to email me about any of this, my work email address is on this slide, or you can of course find me at Vice Chair at IRMS address. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and let's have a look what we've got in terms of questions.
I think we just have the one at the moment, Jaana, from Heather Needham, and she's talking about whether it's possible to outline the benefits of DPC membership, what is available to members as opposed to the range of guidance which is available to non-members.
Okay, I would need to cheat and go and have a look, because even though because obviously I have been a member, so it's a bit hard for me to imagine not being a member. But when I have looked, a lot of the materials is there. So I think one of the big benefits is, as a member, you don't need to pay to attend the events. That's one. And also getting feedback to exercises like the RAM, that's another benefit. And what else would there be? That's the main things. I'll have to get back to you on that, because those are the two that I think of first.
Okay, thank you. We now have a question in the questions tab from Michelle, asking, is there any funding that we can tap into for digital preservation, please?
In what way? As IRMS or as organizations?
Okay. Would you like to put something in the chat, Michelle?
Oh, hi, Michelle. Just found your question. So you might. Well, this is something that I'm really interested in, as you might gather, and as the incoming IRMS chair, I'm hoping to develop collaboration between the IRMS and DPC, and I know they feel the same way because I've had conversations with William Kilbride. So that doesn't really include funding as such, but maybe more guidance available to our members. That's one thing. And as for funding, I'm just thinking, because every organization is in a different place and have different resources, so we may start looking at what kind of things would funding help our members to achieve, which they can't at the moment.
Michelle has actually clarified exactly what she's looking for, but it's in the chat, not in the question.
Okay, going there now. Okay, so digitization programs. Thank you. Again, I would look because we are a member of the DPC under the UKRI umbrella, so I'm aware of the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So they are probably a place that might be involved in making grants available to preserve cultural heritage. And because I'm in the natural sciences, I haven't looked what they have available. I know that we look at grants in our field all the time. So Arts and Humanities Research Council is the place to look for that type of grants, I would say.
There are now 2 more questions on the questions tab, Jaana, one from Sean and one from Julie. So Sean is mentioning about you mentioned not having passwords on files. Do you or anyone else have experience cracking passwords to remove them? Any recommended software or companies?
Well, the only passwords I have managed to remove are Excel files, and you can Google how to crack Excel files and get those, but it's so specific to the software that is password protected, and because our data center is open data anyway, as we don't tend to get a lot of password protected, and if we do, we reject those and ask for them to be submitted without the password protection. So unfortunately, Sean, I'm not the best person to answer that particular question. I would just stick on to refusing password protected content if you want to preserve them in the long term.
And Julie Walker is asking, do you have any tips on persuading the business to buy into record keeping, as we're having trouble with some areas due to the volumes?
Well, I'm actually just looking at this in a different way, because I'm moving from digital preservation and research data management into data and information governance. So I'm having to look at our corporate strategy. What is it that your organization wants to do? And you need to tie your record keeping to that corporate strategy. So what are the pain points? What are the most interesting and the most crucial areas for the business the leaders to maintain their access to, and use those as a hook to start developing best practice. I'm sure you have best practice already, but sort of increase that awareness of why things need to be done. And I appreciate the volumes, because you may not be able to afford the same effort on all the content and all the records that you have. So you do need to prioritize and then look at those most at risk. So I'm talking to our risk manager, for example, about any audits that he's done before. So if you have any audit records where they have identified any risks for the organization and why the organization may be sued or lose money or have reputational risk because they lose some content or do not keep the content, those would be the areas to raise first, and then take it from there.
Thank you. So Anna has a question in the chat, and that's, do you find that different practical solutions are required for document items, Word, Excel, etc., versus large databases that may have been created on old software that is no longer supported or bespoke? For example, the methods of storage or format migration strategy.
The older the content, the bigger the risk. So when we started looking at some data sets in the data center where the content was generated by different stakeholders, subcontractors, etc., and they went back to pre-Excel spreadsheets, so there was really old content. You need to identify those first and see if those can be rescued at all, and then also draw a line from now on that you don't accept near obsolete content into your collections at all, but you expect things to be up to date, all the new deposits. And I'm just looking again that I haven't Yep. Well, you can use Droid to look at the different versions, for example, so older Word, older Excel, just to make sure that you try to keep everything as new as possible when you take it in, because the newer versions of even Office are much more robust than, say, 20 years ago when they started. And sometimes, and this is quite an expensive and technical solution. I haven't talked about preservation strategies, and emulation would be one to use to recreate an environment where something, and it's used quite a lot in gaming. Old software was used to create a game or a document or an environment, and new computing systems and platforms really don't work with that anymore. So you can use emulation to recreate that, and then in that recreated environment be able to operate on the obsolete documents, for example.
Thank you. So Janet Hancock has now come up with a question again in the chat. Do you deal differently with digitized versus born digital material? For example, human error with digitized material, which may require amendments, i.e. extraction of replacement of digitized objects as a result of, e.g. a missing page which needs to be added, in contrast to born digital, which will not need amendment / remove from the repository?
So obviously when you do especially large digitization projects, there's a big effort that has to go into quality assurance and quality control, which by force has to be human, because you can't get machines to spot all these mistakes that may go into your digitized content. The benefit you have, though, is you can be more prescriptive about the format that digitized content is created in. So you may, for example, say that you only create TIFFs because they are more robust and they are more detailed than, say, PDFs. Or if it's sort of text documents, you may decide that PDF-As rather than anything else are your choice. So you have that benefit. Whereas if you get born digital material, you get what you get. And then if you need to migrate it to another content, then you may have 100 different born digital, that's exaggerating, say 10 different born digital formats that you want to migrate into one master format. So they both have their benefits. But yeah, the manual intervention in quality assurance is one of the things that does take time and does cost money.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any other questions from anyone? The reason why I was reading the questions out was because you can't see the chat on the recording. So sometimes there's an answer to the question, but we don't have the question itself. So Kate has a question. Do you always or only ask for deposits to be transferred to yourself or a dedicated drive for DP? And if so, how does that transfer happen? Thinking of DP actions required on long-term records to lower organizational risk, not necessarily archives.
So we have actually built an online deposit portal. So we only accept, well, let's say we would prefer all the deposits to come through the portal, because the portal is built so that it collects all the necessary metadata, descriptive metadata. So you go to the portal, you complete the metadata, you upload your data files. Sometimes the data set that the depositor wants to hand over to us is too big to transfer it through the portal. So we have, and this is now going back to my day job at the data center, the Natural Environment Research Council have a network of data centers, and one of them deals with big data. So we direct people to upload the data there rather than to us. Or we also, as a last resort, accept a hard drive to be sent to us, so we can then harvest the data of that hard drive and get it into our corporate network drive. But the metadata comes through the portal, no matter which of these options you use. Personally, again, the PDF Word, if you only need to preserve the look of the document, if it's a text or picture document and you don't anticipate having to manipulate that content, then PDF-A is a very good solution. But if you need to edit that document later, then I would have both versions, to be fair. The latest Word document and the PDF for archiving, maybe. So it's there what you want to do with that. Is it just share it or is it actually to work on it? Like my other example earlier was about Excel. So do you just want to capture the spreadsheet as it is now, or do you want to be using the formula in the cells later? So that, I think, demonstrates the advantages.
We have a question from Heather on the questions tab. Is there a place to look for recommended migration pathways to draw on when setting up rules in a system?
Yeah, Pronom register, which I showed on one of the slides, there are migration pathways recommended in connection with the file format. So that's the first place I would look.
Thank you. So do we have any further questions? As I'm very conscious that we're getting quite close to 2 o'clock now. If we don't have any further questions, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Jaana for sharing her time and expertise with us. And I think that it's been a very good introduction to the subject, and I very much appreciate you giving us your time. For those of you who are interested in records management in schools, we have the first event for the schools group for 2023 next Thursday between 1:30 and 2:30, and Claire Archibald will be speaking about records management in the digital school, and I can highly recommend that for those of you who have contact with schools. So if you would like to book up to that, it's the event is on the IRMS website. So it just falls to me to say once again a huge thank you to Jaana, and I hope everyone has a pleasant afternoon, and I will look forward to seeing you at future events.
And thank you for all the attendees, and yes, indeed, see you in Manchester if you're coming.
Thank you.